This week's show brought to you by Crickets, the official mascot of the NBA offseason. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. It is still the NBA offseason, which means thousands of amazing trades have been going on, and we have tons to discuss about the NBA. Just kidding. We're actually going to talk about competitive e-gaming, which we still find very interesting. I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. Patrick is off this week, but we do have our amazing producer who is always here, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Give a shout out for our listeners, Brian.
What's up, Dre? And, I like the off-season stuff a little more than you, but I'm glad, we're twisting your arm to talk about it here. It'll be fun.
Well, I think as you've mentioned before, the off-season's nice, and then that's because we don't have the impetus to be rushing so much with recent, trends or this player that's going off, is Klay Thompson the next Michael Jordan, that kind of stuff. We have, in theory, more time for analysis, but, it also means that if we don't really push ourselves to do that, it doesn't happen. And so it's kind of a love-hate, where this is the time where if you wanted to see great, in-depth analysis of stuff that, would probably be interesting to 10% of our viewership, that can happen, but it won't necessarily. And that's actually the first topic I want to discuss. So I got three topics. I got a brief PSA. I feel like I have to do these a lot, but whatever. I'm going to do what we call the wall of boredom, which is where I go over the transactions in the NBA of the last week. And then we're going to talk video games. So anyway, our brief PSA, I notice I kind of always have to do this right after we have a show that's really heavy on social justice stuff. I don't really hate it, though, because I do feel it's nice coaching for our audience. You've kind of said that before, Brian, where let's be the kind-hearted people that just assume some kind of naivete from our audience, and that we just have to kind of coach them on these issues because they may not be as familiar. So anyway, when it comes to things like social justice, race, which comes up occasionally on the show, the first thing is, one, it is our show. I've talked a little bit about this before, about kind of the privilege. I certainly understand if you were paying, and even if you're paying, you still just have the choice not to pay. On the internet, there's a lot of entitlement about people assuming something is their show. Because they like something, it should behave the way they like. Certainly the walls between content creators and consumers have broken down. Things like Twitter, Facebook. Our comment sections allow a lot more back and forth than prior. That's a wonderful thing. It has produced some of our best articles because we get great ideas from the commenters. It really helps in the case where, we're low on things like fact checkers. If I ever have a mistake in my article, I can be sure it'll be found, within 2 hours of it going up. So that's awesome. But on the same side, just on the internet, I've kind of said this before, just be careful about that. When you are interacting with a content provider, just, don't treat it as if you're their boss. Treat it as if a friend with some good ideas. All right. In terms of social justice stuff, one, it's not really going to go away on the show. As I've mentioned before, I kind of have the perfect Venn diagram with one of our listeners who actually tweeted at me right before the show started, EJ Fisher. And that's actually my goal. EJ Fisher is actually my target audience. So I do love sports. I do love things like wrestling. I do love things like science fiction and pop culture and social justice. There's this perfect Venn diagram. There's one person I've met that all of that overlaps with. That's EJ Fisher and, of course, Patrick. That's what I'm aiming for, which means it's not always going to be what you like on the show, but hopefully we have a wide enough breadth of topics that you'll still, enjoy it. And the last thing is just the kind of check your privilege comment, which I find bristles a lot of people, but I'll say it anyway, which is whenever we kind of talk race on the show, sexism on the show, I do notice kind of a pushback, which is some people, and it seems like they're predominantly white male, want to push back and say, what's the big deal? And I get that because it's really easy when something's not necessarily a problem to you to kind of go, what's the big deal? And I understand not necessarily understanding the problem. But the question I just want you to have in your head, and please don't put it in the comment section. I'm not going to be mean. I don't care. I don't want to argue it. Is just think for a second what the importance of proving the other person wrong in this case is. When someone says the United States has a problem with race and you're white, if someone says the internet has a problem with sexism and you're a male, ask yourself what you gain by disproving this person and how wrong you really think they are. That's all I'll throw out there. All right, on to sports. As I mentioned, Brian, we're going to go to the wall of boredom. And because we don't actually have that many topics, topics, players, I can actually go one by one. And I've decided to add a scale to this. So we're going to go over every transaction. Feel free to jump in if you're feeling so inclined, Brian. And I'm going to give it a scale on a rating system of meaning I don't care, mildly interesting, meaning I'm kind of mildly interested in it, and like highly interested. And highly interested doesn't necessarily mean it's a good move. It just means the implication of said move really, really interests me. So with that said, let's review the week in transactions in the NBA. I'm using ESPN's. Let's start with Zoran Dragic, who was waived by the Boston Celtics. This does rate as an for me. He's not a good player. I tried really hard to look up his numbers, and this is a player where I don't understand how he has a career in the NBA. One of our favorite people on the show is Paul Shirley, who's come on and guested a few times. He was a journeyman in the NBA. I think he played under a dozen NBA games. Zoran Dragic has played 16 NBA games, and all I can say is his numbers aren't good. His numbers in the EuroLeague aren't good. Really, the only thing I think he has going for him is that he's related to Goran Dragic. So I fully agree that the Celtics should have waived him. I just don't understand how he ever had a career to begin with.
Yeah, and their first names are similar too. I mean, it could be like, oh, are you sure that's a Z? It could be a typo. It could really be a G.
Yeah, what is with that, by the way? All the different. We're going to talk another person who I actually forgot to look up. So if you're able to quickly find international stats or anything on him, but and I'm just the other Atentacompo. I'm not even going to try and say his first name because I muck up Giannis a bunch anyway. But these players in the NBA where their parents named the kids really similar names. You know, we have Seth Curry and Steph Curry. We have Zoran Dragic, Goran Dragic. I don't understand parents.
I think they just kind of run out of energy after a while. They're like, we did what we can on this first kid. You know, hopefully the others will turn out well too.
Fair enough. So do you have anything on the scale there? Mildly amusing, or mildly interested, highly interested.
I guess the brother side makes it interesting somewhat. That's about it. I'll give it a medium, whatever that was.
All right. I think that's a little too high, but I didn't make this street. So, all right. Now, near and dear to my heart, on August 7th, the Denver Nuggets re-signed Jameer Nelson to a multi-year contract, signed Darrell Arthur and Will Barton. Now, it's mildly interesting is where I'm going to have to put this just because it is a team near and dear to my heart, the Nuggets. I can't quite bring myself to let them go, even being in a new state. What I will say about this move is I'm not excited because, first off, when Darrell Arthur was traded to the Nuggets for a very, very good player, I can't believe I just dropped his name. I feel really, really bad about that now. But our good center who could just never get minutes, I was upset because Darrell Arthur was terrible. And on the Nuggets, he has remained terrible. Jameer Nelson in his heyday was a decent player. He was in fact drafted by the Nuggets and went to the Orlando Magic where he actually played above average. He is now really, really old and not that good. The only real thing I can give him is maybe he's a good locker room guy. But that said, especially with the loss of Ty Lawson, I'll give that a little better. With the loss of Ty Lawson, you've got a veteran guy who help me out with the name. It's Moutier, I think is how you say it, Emmanuel.
Oh yeah, is he? I want to say he's Australian, maybe. Or I'm getting him confused with Exum. I don't know.
I think that might be right. But, you know, he was drafted by the Nuggets. And, you know, obviously with the trading of Ty Lawson, he's clearly what they're picturing being the future of the point guard. I don't hate that move. I mean, something that always will make me bristle in the NBA, although I guess we shouldn't care so much about it given how much we talk about owners not paying enough, is I don't like overplaying for players you don't have to. So Jameer Nelson is, in my mind, ostensibly a very, very expensive assistant coach. But I guess at the same time, doesn't really matter. You know, you've got billionaires spending money, wasting money anyway. So what do I care if a veteran guy that's been kind of nice gets a little extra money? And the last player is Will Barton, who I wasn't that excited when he came over because he had never been productive in Portland, but was actually productive in limited minutes with the Nuggets. So maybe he'll be good. I mean, all in all, this is re-signing three players, only one of whom is young and possibly has upside. One is terrible and one is old. So don't expect this to help the Nuggets out at all. Really, that's the long and short of it. All right. Next, we've got on the same day, August 7th, the Knicks signed Sasha Vucevic, the Machine. Sorry, I'm going to mess up his last name. This week is just a bunch of players with names I'm going to mess up. I apologize. And like I said, the other Atentacumpo brother. And I don't actually have any stats on him. Do you happen to have any up on Thanasis or however you say it? I
I don't know if he's
apologize.
played in the NBA yet, but I'll take a look.
It looks like he's played D League stats. So
Oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
I'm gonna okay. Actually, Basketball Reference does have D League stats for him. Not spectacular. His true shooting over there is not really all. Well, it was really good on his first year, decent. It wasn't really good his second year. His turnover rate's kind of high. He's all right, I guess. Nothing to be too excited about. I do feel this is kind of. We might talk this a little more when we get into video games, but I feel in the NBA there is less impetus for teams to look at stats. It's the case. It's we've been banging this drum for years. It's when they draft players from college, they don't look at players who are productive in college. They look at players who look like the players they want. And I think both Zoran and Atentacumpo basically they benefit from having a relative in the NBA who's really good. And you go, well, they look like a really good player. But by the way, this move does not. These moves, Sasha, who didn't play last season, is old and was on the decline. I think at his best, he was an average player, and that was with the Lakers with Phil Jackson. The last couple of years, he's just been steadily declining and not even playing the minutes. I almost feel like this is just Jackson trying to get a player he liked, but that's actually not the best thing in the NBA. You don't want to get attached to players and be friends with them because the rough part is players age and get worse. And if you can't really bring yourself to kind of give up on a sunk cost, you're not going to have a great team. The only case I'll give an exception to is maybe the Spurs, where you kind of want to keep a culture in place so that newer players are willing to take pay cuts. That's one thing. Everybody that ever brings up Tim Duncan being drafted by the Spurs and why tanking is the right strategy, note that Tim Duncan has repeatedly left money on the table to stay with the Spurs. And you can look at the number of players in the NBA who have done the exact opposite. Look at Dwight Howard, with Los Angeles. He left money on the table to go to Houston. Maybe, I mean, there might be tax implications. Shaquille O'Neal, I don't care what you say. He went to a worse team in Los Angeles with higher taxes. So when he was on the Orlando Magic, they basically offered him the exact same deal that the Los Angeles Lakers did, and he just didn't want to play in Orlando. He wanted to go to a bigger market that, for his wonderful movie career and movies such as Steel. We have seen time and time again star players leave money on the table to ditch franchises because they want to play for a better team, maybe in terms of contending. That's what we had with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. Better teams in terms of being kind of the environment they want. That's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, that's Shaq. Better team in just being a better environment. That's, Dwight, although obviously with Kobe coming back, you can kind of see the writing on the wall. The Lakers weren't going to compete. So the fact that Tim Duncan has repeatedly left money on the table to stay in a small market, just play for the Spurs, shows the impact of having a good environment. I don't necessarily feel the Knicks are doing that. As long as they still have Carmelo Anthony around, you're not going to convince me that they're breeding a good culture of personality. So good on you, Phil, for signing your buddy, but I don't think it's going to help out long term.
Kevin Seraphim too to the Knicks.
Okay, Kevin Seraphim. I don't even remember. Did he make the? Let's see. He was terrible last season.
I don't think
in
he's
limited
ever been
minutes.
good.
Yeah, and I'm looking. Yeah, his best season was his second year in Washington, where in 1,100 minutes he had a points over par per 48 of negative .09, which essentially means if he played the full game, average team, he's spotting the other team a point. Any gambler would be happy to know a player was spotting them a point for the spread. So yeah, that's not what you're looking for. So in terms of the Knicks, I'm actually going to do the same kind of trick you did, the mildly interesting. This team is a train wreck, and when Phil Jackson took over, I was really excited. I was like, okay, here's one of the better coaches in the NBA. Does the Zen Master actually have what it takes to run a team? And to be fair, what I should be honest about is I had kind of overlooked kind of questionable things in reading over his books, where, you read over his books with him as a coach and like advice he gave to the front offices. And so, for instance, like Dennis Rodman is a huge part of his success. Well, Dennis Rodman was 10th on his list, and some of the names above Dennis Rodman on the list for the Bulls to sign weren't that great of power forwards. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised that Phil Jackson, especially older, that's kind of one of the issues you can have is an older person with a lot of success. Look at Michael Jordan is going to have kind of an ego. So I shouldn't be surprised that an older, more egotistical Phil Jackson isn't fantastic at running a team. But yeah, basically, I'm kind of mildly interested because the Knicks are going to remain bad for a while. All right, on to the Dallas Mavericks, who on the 6th signed Sam Dalembert and Charlie Villanueva. Now, Dalembert was once a productive player, but he's just old, been getting limited minutes and not that great. And considering that they were at one point targeting DeAndre Jordan, this is just, feels like a filler move that is not really going to move the win dial much, if anything. Villanueva, I don't really get at all. Villanueva has never really been a great player. In fact, when he was signed by the Detroit Pistons was kind of when we knew the death knell was there for Joe Dumars, and that maybe Joe Dumars didn't know what he was talking about because he lost Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace, and he has all of this money. He has all this money from those two losses to sign new players, and you go, what's he going to do with it? And he went with Ben Gordon and Charlie V, and Charlie V was horrible for Milwaukee, was never good for Detroit. His best was last season with Dallas when in limited minutes, he left 2 points on the table, the points over par of negative 2.1 per 48. So I don't really, that's the thing for me is any team that signs a veteran player that's below average, unless you tell me behind the scenes news about it. I mean, and there is a lot to be said for that. You can tell me this guy is, in the stable of a bunch of agents' clients that we really like this agent. We want to have a good relationship with them, and we really want a good shot at this player in the future. So we signed this player to kind of keep relationships good. You can tell me, hey, look, we're looking to make a trade for this player and this draft pick for one of these players, and we're going to need the cap space to make it work. So we need at least this much money on the books. For those of you that haven't read over the CBA FAQ in depth, like I have on several occasions, basically, when you make a trade and you're over the cap, you have to be within a certain percentage of salaries to make the trade work. So there are times where it's worth it for you to basically keep yourself, if you're above the salary cap, it's worth it to keep a few players on your roster for, that mid-level area just to be able to make trades work. So there are possible GM reasons you could give me for keeping Villanueva. From a fan, does this make my team better immediately viewpoint? The answer is simply no. So for Dallas, that's just a solid for me because it's, basically getting a filler because they couldn't get the player they want and getting a not good player for reasons I don't 100% understand. I think last week on our wall of boredom, we did miss that Josh Richardson was signed by the Heat. According to Lane Vashrow's numbers, he's not really expecting much, if anything, out of him. I think part of it is he is an older player, so I don't think his numbers in college were that great. And him being a little older basically amounts to, him not expecting a high upside from him. Again, the Heat with their cap situation, which is in a rough spot because they gave a lot of money to Chris Bosh, who then did have the lung clots last year. They ended up giving more money to Dwayne. What ended up happening with Dwayne Wade? Do you happen to know that off the top of your head, Brian?
No, I'll look it up.
I apologize profusely because I remember he had the weird thing where he re-signed and then he opted out. And then I don't remember if he got re-signed by them. So apologies, listeners. That's me dropping the ball there, and we're looking it up as we speak. But, a lot of their money is really devoted to a couple players that are past their prime. And arguably, I do really like Dwayne Wade. I do really like Chris Bosh. But really, they were never the top players on the team when it was winning titles with LeBron James. Dwayne Wade had been when they first joined forces. When Bron and Wade first joined forces, Wade and Bron were like 1 and 2. They were like Jordan and Pippen. But then after that, what ended up happening was, Wade kind of started declining and it became more like Shaq and Kobe. So anyway, he re-signed for 1 year for $20 million. So this next season, between Bosh and Wade and a bunch of other players, Luol Deng, Goran Dragic, a bunch of their cap is filled, so they weren't going to be able to make any major moves. So again, that's one of those shuffling deck chairs. Not much major. The only kind of line we could give is, hey, if you were going to invest the money in just a low-cost player, undrafted player, maybe go for one with more upside. So that rates an on my scale.
Yeah, and just going back to the Dallas moves real briefly, they kind of reminded me of what you said about the Knicks, which is, I mean, haven't both those guys have several stints on the Mavs before? Cuban might have just said, "Hey, I know these guys. I like them personally. Let's just bring them back in."
Oh yeah, and so my camera just went out for a second. I'll turn it back on in a sec, Brian.
Sounds good.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, there's a lot interesting in front office management, and me being kind of a fan and talking to some people like Paul Shirley, like some agents online, has broadened it a lot in that you realize the way decisions are made are not always as cut and dry as we would like. That a lot
Yeah.
of times there are weird behind the scenes moves going on, and even DeAndre Jordan, we actually got a glimpse into one of the kind of weird off season things that how the NBA works. If you make an offer to someone, basically that money is tied up. And you have to wait until that player says yes or no. And then in some cases, if it's like a restricted free agent, you have to wait until the team that you're trying to poach them from agrees to match the offer or not. And as a result, you can end up in a really weird situation where you're targeting three players, and basically you say, as soon as I pull the trigger on one of these, those other two might be gone by the time I'm allowed to go approach them again. And so it can get really, really weird when you're trying to grade teams on the offseason about bad moves they've made, because for all you know, they were 90% of the way to getting a player they wanted, and that player did the DeAndre Jordan thing at the last second and balked. And really the reason that they got screwed is that they were approaching this player very heavily and said, we can't make this offer to a secondary player we want, because if we do, we don't have the money to get this top player. And so what happens is a lot of the big splash moves are more complicated than we make them out to be when we report them. And then additionally, these secondary moves that I argue teams should give a lot more thought to can become a lot more just, behavioral psychology of saying, hey, I know that guy. Hey, I like that guy. Hey, I don't have to sort through all of these really terrible players and try and find one that's a little better. That was the whole Moneyball thing, by the way, was sorting through the garbage and finding undervalued assets. That's what teams should be doing, but I can see, teams get fatigued. And so that's why stuff like this happens. And I'm actually going to give a shout out to a movie I really enjoyed, preemptive shout out, and I'll give it a shout outs as well, which is The Death of Superman Lives, which is a fantastic documentary about what happened to the Tim Burton, Nicolas Cage instance of Superman. And what I thought they did a really good job as documentarians is they talked to all these people involved, and this project basically imploded. And they did a really good job of getting everybody's point of view. Now, like one of the people, which I think his name was Peterson or Patterson, was the producer. Seems like kind of a nut. Kevin Smith has gotten a lot of airtime in him on his talking circuit, talking about him. And the thing that they did really well is they said, it's possible this person was wrong. And that is definitely the case. That is one takeaway. But they said there were reasons for everything he was doing. It wasn't that he was just coming at this a bumbling buffoon being stupid. He had reasons for why he was asking the writers, directors to do various things. And I think that's important. And I feel it's something, I'll be honest, when we talk quants, an issue we can have is we'll look at a team, we'll yell and say, wow, this team was really dumb. Why did this team sign Jameer Nelson, right? And we don't really know. We don't know the point of view of the person that signed him. And it could literally be they go up to the owner and they say, hey, I need to sign a backup point guard. We only have 2 million. These are 3 names on my list. And the third one, the guy goes, I don't recognize this guy. This guy had a really horrible interview. I don't want to sign him. Oh yeah, he's played for us before. I like this third guy. And that can happen. And it gets really easy for us to go, what a horrible move, and not just know, it's kind of like at your job. Like when I used to work at Target, there were various policies in place that meant we weren't allowed to do certain types of returns. We weren't allowed to do certain things when customers complained. And I would have even agreed that they were stupid, but I'm not allowed to do anything about it. So it gets really annoying when the customer yells at you as a Target employee and says, why aren't you doing this? So, basically I'll say, apologies. It's the off season. Maybe I'm feeling a little nicer. We're not seeing teams win or lose or do outrageous things. So off season, I'm feeling a little nicer. Front offices, I forgive you. But the off season's boring.
I've got a brief follow-up, actually, that I thought of when you were saying that. Yeah. So I'm going to put on my thinking fast and slow cap when I ask this question. Is there any value to owners being lazy or not spending time or whatever for these guys on the end of the bench? Because we know that, whoever your 12th guy is, maybe there's some hidden gems. Like you said, that's what Moneyball is all about. but at the same time, it's likely none of these guys are going to pan out. So maybe they should just bring in their buddies and not waste time and energy on it. Because as much resources as NBA teams have, they're still limited resources, and they can only scout and talk to so many players.
There is a lot to what you just said, which is really interesting. I think there is a ton to being lazy when you don't know what you're doing. So
Right.
have you, you and I talk a lot of popular tech terms. Have you heard of the nuclear reactor shed problem?
No, but that sounds interesting. Tell us about it.
Okay, so basic topic. If you work in tech, occasionally you'll have meetings where, like, I as a developer will go in and say, we want to implement this solution, right? We want to have a website that live streams NBA games. Maybe you guys should work on making an effective one, NBA.com. Live stream NBA games, and it's going to cost this much, and it's going to need these technologies, it's going to have to work on these phones, blah, blah, blah. And I use a lot of big words and a lot of technology. I say we were trying to decide between a SOAP and a JSON API, and we, ended up going with XML because we hate our users, and we're going to have to interact with these browsers, and we're going to have to go back to at least this one. And I have all these big technical terms that a non-technical person looks and their eyes just gloss over as I start listing terms, and I'm saying, 11.2 millisecond actions per millisecond or something, all this jazz. Now, the nuclear reactor is the same thing. I go in, I have a nuclear reactor, I have all these specs for a nuclear reactor, and your eyes glaze over as I'm talking about yield and what type of chemical reaction we're going to do and blah, 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 blah. Now, at the end, I say, hey, this nuclear reactor is actually going to need a shed to hold some of the materials that some of the workers are going to need, and we're going to put it in this area. Fine. Still, you don't give a damn. But I say, basically our company colors are green and yellow. So I decided, just paint the shed green and yellow. And now everybody in the meeting perks up. Everybody, the managers, the project managers, the low-level employees, they all have an opinion on what color this shed should be because they now feel they have some domain knowledge. Before, when I was telling them about nuclear reactors, they're not physicists, they don't know. But the second I brought up what color to paint the shed, everybody's an interior designer or exterior designer in this case. And that kind of problem actually can happen a lot in sports. It's why I get in arguments on Twitter with people where I bring up stats. Everybody feels like they know something about sports. If I start talking about statistics abstractly online, it's going to be crickets on my Twitter feed. If I start saying, wow, I had a null hypothesis test and I got this value, clearly it was false, no one's going to say a damn thing. But if I say Kobe is not, according to the statistics, Kobe is statistically significantly worse in the clutch. Now I'm going to get a bunch of people going, I watch Kobe play, I know. And so this is actually a problem with owners, which is most owners don't know the stats. Most owners, what you just said, right? There are only so many players you can review. That's why you have an analytics team. If an owner doesn't have time to review all the stats and get really caught up on the stats, and most owners don't, their best bet is to stay out and trust the people they put in charge. Now that brings up a second problem, which is how you know how to trust the people you put in charge, and that's a way longer topic for maybe another podcast when we want to discuss it at some point. But that's the point: is an owner being lazy and trusting in a process is a much smarter method if you believe you're going to pick the right players. And the problem we often run into is you get these people that say, well, I know Andre Miller and he's got the will to win. I know this guy and he's a lazy player. You see these kind of abstract terms thrown around NBA players a lot. And you go, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that Kobe's got the will of a champion? It doesn't mean his shots go in the clutch at a higher rate than normal. So what does that matter? Why are we bringing this up? So to your point, yeah, I think it's good to be lazy. Maybe not for the reason you're saying. Maybe not because it's too much work. Maybe when you don't know something, it is much better to have a process you have faith in that you trust than to try and put a lot of effort into it yourself.
Well said. And did I get this link right here? Are we talking about Parkinson's law of triviality?
I have no idea if that's what it's called. I've always just heard it in lectures as the nuclear reactor shed. So I will look over that when we're done with the show, and if it's the correct one, I will mention it in the links.
Well, so what it says at the top, just for our non-video listeners here, Parkinson's law of triviality, also known as bike shedding, it's an argument that organizations give disproportionate weight to trivial issues like the bike shed instead of the actual nuclear reactor.
Oh yeah, and it's because, again, people want to believe that they can do something, that they can contribute, and it's really hard. That's one of my favorite Freakonomics, where they talk about penalty kicks in soccer, and that The wise move is to just stay in the middle of the goal a majority of the time. And most people don't, because we are conditioned to believe that action trumps inaction. So if you're in a meeting and you can't contribute, you feel bad, even though the right move for so many owners, the right move for so many assistant coaches is to just shut up and not say anything. Like you mentioned, it's the 12th guy. He's going to be getting 500 minutes at most, right? That would be an insane amount of minutes to give a 12th guy. Why are you overreacting? Let the analytics guys try and pick a person that's got high upside. Now, get a good analytics squad. That's a problem most teams haven't fixed. But if you've got a good analytics squad, just let them do what they're going to do and stay out of the way. But that's a really hard issue for a lot of people to deal with in management and companies. And that's not just the NBA. That is, I've seen that every company I've been to, we've had meetings where an engineer is giving a lot of good reasons for stuff. And the second they do something, we're going to use this font, the room perks up and everybody has an opinion. You go, really? We want to spend half an hour of 12 people in a meeting's time discussing the font to put on this, even though we have, company-wide fonts that we've all already agreed on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just so funny because it's happened to me so many times. I can't really add to it.
I was going to say, now you know the name. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so let's actually hop into competitive video games. So I'm actually going to let you get the tease on this because you sent the link along and this was fascinating to me. And I have a lot of thoughts on this, actually.
Yeah, definitely. So, no, I linked this to you and Patrick over the weekend because we just came off of a week of the International 5 in Seattle, which was a big Dota 2 tournament, Defense of the Ancients, and that'll mean a lot to some people and nothing to
so
others.
To the people, it means nothing to. What is DOTH?
That's right. Yeah. So it's a it's an online competitive game, teams of 5 versus 5, and they're doing battle. That's the simplest way to put it. And the reason I brought this topic up is because of ESPN's coverage of it was really interesting. That and then you gave me an even better link. Maybe I should get this up here. But basically, so John Skipper, who is the head man at ESPN, or one of them in terms of deciding who gets on air anyway, he's, was involved in the whole Bill Simmons thing. He was an ally for a while. Anyway, really one of the most important guys in sports media. And he famously said last year that esports is not sports. We're not going to cover it. We don't want to. Well, things have changed since then. They've been showing a lot of it, and the coverage was interesting. So the reason what caught my attention is I'll bring up this graphic right now. This article is from digitaltrends.com. It's not a website I'm really familiar with, but this is a good headline. ESPN's coverage of the International 5 is befuddled but not condescending. And they've got this graphic here that I like too. They show it with Wimbledon, the Masters, and the Kentucky Derby in terms of the purses, right, and the winner's shares. So they're just trying to they're trying to frame it that way, right? Like, here's kind of the financial level that this is at. And yeah, $18 million is a big purse for an esports event, or any event for that matter.
And it was what, 6.6 goes to the winners, and you said it was a team of 5. So if they did some kind of if they did some kind of split, that's almost tennis or golf money, where each player on this team is assumably getting, I don't know the breakdown. It could be like a band, right, where there is an all-star and they get a lot of money.
And their management takes a 10% rake as well.
So
they're getting.
But I mean, that's still close to $1 million a winner for that, and that is huge. And as you pointed out, like, the purse was bigger than Wimbledon or the Masters. So
yeah,
that's a big deal. Now, what I'll say is that was really an odd thing for John Skipper, right, to say, given how much they covered poker. Like, poker
is the best analogy, yeah.
But I mean, just poker. I mean, even you can argue whatever you want about it, but poker really was a big deal with the loss of hockey. If you recall, hockey went under.
I forgot about that.
Well, so yeah, hockey went on strike in 2005, and one of the things we've talked a lot about at Wages of Wins is strikes and lockouts don't matter for fandom. Now, the one place it does matter is if you don't have your television contract in place and you go on strike, and then the place that you had a television contract with goes, hey, can we just replace your content with something else? And the answer is yes, then maybe you're in trouble. So that's what happened with hockey. That probably actually hurt them because they lost their ESPN deal, at least at the time. But the simple fact of the matter is ESPN saying we're not going to cover competitive gaming because we don't think it's a sport. I can shrug my shoulders and go, I think it's just a dumb kind of argument. You know, we've talked Gamergate and sexism a bit. One of the topics that's come up in recent years is what is a gamer? And, you know, I'm wearing
Mm.
like a shirt with the icon. When I went to the gas station right before I came here, and me and the cashier ended up talking about Zelda 2 and the upcoming Zelda for a while about this, and how the last boss in Zelda 2 is stupid. Your shadow is stupid. The fact that you can beat it with such an easy cheat, I can't believe that. It's one of the most bafflingly annoying things ever, but Zelda 2 is still one of the best games ever. Sorry to get off track. But you know, identifying as a gamer, what does that mean? And kind of just the stupid title. And so, you know, ESPN going, well, that's not a sport, or this is a sport. Just this kind of abstract gatekeeping. It doesn't seem to matter. I mean, really, for me on ESPN, the you know, as Dave Barry is fond of saying, the E stands for entertainment. They're not a news
Yep.
organization. They are 100% about entertainment. And for me, there's a lot exciting about gaming as a sport. And I'm gonna, you know, call it something else if you want to call it a game of skill or whatever. There's something really exciting about it, and you know, poker was already there. So that's the point: is you can at ESPN say we're not interested in competitive gaming because it's not a sport. You go, well, what is poker?
Yeah.
And then even then, I don't even care about that distinction because the reality is these are really difficult. These are really difficult activities. You know, the people. I think Daniel Negreanu,
Mm-hmm.
Phil Mickelson. He's a good
Phil
golfer.
Hellmuth.
Phil Hellmuth. Wow, way to catch it. Phil Mickelson is good at golf. Phil Hellmuth is good at poker. I can't believe I made the same mistake right after you caught me on that. You know, Daniel Negreanu is really good. You've got these all stars who are just fantastic at it. You know, clearly poker is not easy. Clearly, to be competitive at poker regularly is not, you know, an easy thing to do, and the same is true of gaming. So you can't really just say it's all luck. Now there is more luck involved, but again, if we look at the kind of the spectrum of sports, look at say football up to the NBA. In football you can have a team with a losing record win the title. In basketball that has never happened and won't happen. It's really surprising that the Houston Rockets back in the day managed to do it, but it's fair to say that will never happen again. So, you know, these are games of skill that are entertaining to watch. And if that's all you need, that's great. And the money is clearly there. So first off, that argument, I think the game theorist post that I sent you talks that. It's like, what's the point? The reason I'm excited for this is a lot of what the game theorist video I sent you said. And one is,
We got that up
um,
right now
yeah,
for the viewers.
one of the interesting aspects of this is we talk a lot about kind of manipulating athletes and abusing them and taking advantage of them. And this will always be the case, by the way, right? Big companies will always take advantage of people. But look at the stakes in terms of a lot of sports that require a high degree of athleticism. It takes years and years to even get into the league. You basically cost your body even just getting into the league, right? You've already spent years and years playing athletics at a high level. You get into the league, and to play really well, you know, who was the player? I apologize if you know this off the top of your head. You've been on the ball, Brian.
Oh, let's see.
He just retired from football. He put a tweet up that he deleted immediately and just basically said, you know, there are some things more important, and being able to walk at age 50, you know, kind of trumps being able to play a game no matter how much money.
That could have been a few different guys. Well, I mean, here locally, of course, the San Francisco 49ers have had several players retire early this year. Well, I mean, early, whatever that means, right? They've had concussions. But
By the way, yeah, the average career span in the NFL is 3 years.
Yeah.
So early is like after a season or two.
So the one that opened people's eyes, I think. So Patrick Willis was like the best player, but he was 30. I think his heel had broken down, so he was physically incapable of playing anymore. But the young, I believe he was a second-year player, Chris Borland from Wisconsin, actually. That was a big surprise, right? He's in his early 20s. He had a great year as a rookie, and he's just like, nope, it's too dangerous. I'm out. And I think he's even been doing stuff after he retired about concussions. So that might be the guy.
But I mean, there is something to be said for the trade-off between long-term health and momentary greatness in a lot of these things. And I think in the game theorists that they linked to, they even mentioned, there have been some people that have had to retire from competitive gaming due to carpal tunnel already. So,
Yeah.
but the issue being one, from kind of a moral standard, it's really hard to watch football, right? Every single player you are watching play football, there is nothing they're going to be able to do to make football safe. They can make it safer, but even then, there's this weird flip where, for instance, with football, they made better helmets. Well, that they thought that was going to make the game safer, but it turned out what they really did is instead of having a bunch of players whose heads were really, really at risk of getting hit hard, which they still are, they said they gave every single player on the field a weapon. They said, here is a really hard thing you can hit people with. Boxing's the same way, by the way. When they put boxing gloves, they actually made it more dangerous because now your fist is a much more dangerous weapon than it was before because you can hit people harder with it. So these sports that are really popular, even the NBA, which is probably ethically the most easy to kind of watch, maybe baseball. You basically go, these players aren't walking the same when they're done. Read Dr. J's autobiography and any of the great players that kind of lasted a long time. Kobe Bryant's another example. There is so much they're doing behind the scenes to keep their body just working, like not even tip-top shape. There was a great infographic, or maybe not an infographic. It was an image of Allen Iverson at one point that had little arrows pointed at every part of his body that he'd injured at some point in his career. So, any athlete that makes it 10 plus years in the NBA has had so many injuries, maybe not surgeries, but, probably procedures, various tweaks, various shot injections, just to keep their body up to speed. And it's much easier, competitive gaming and poker, right? I've never once watched a poker match and gone, wow, Phil Hellmuth is playing really, really well. It's just a shame that, at age 50 he's going to be done. We talked Roddy Piper last week, and Roddy Piper dying. Like, all of WrestleMania 3 is going to be dead by the time I, put in quotes, retire, right? By the time I'm at retirement age, everybody from WrestleMania 3 is probably going to be dead. Some of my favorite people, like I always bring up Mick Foley, these people are going to be, brain dead at the least. And that's not just, it's professional wrestling, that's football, hockey's got concussion issues too, so does soccer. So just first off, from an ethical standpoint, competitive gaming is a lot more interesting to watch than also just kind of from the subversion of the standard model, because so many of the sports leagues are basically these old boys clubs that were built hundreds of years, not hundreds, 100 years ago, right? One of my articles I wrote about was the origin of the draft. And basically what happened was the Philadelphia Eagles in the early 1900s lost out on a player out of college and got upset, and they said, we need a draft, and all the sports leagues use it. And all of these big teams have, the ins with cities. We are talking Wisconsin and Scott Walker saying, screw education, but let's give money to a stadium. So all of these really popular sports leagues that kind of exist in the form they do now are highly exploitative of both young athlete and talent to a really weird, we talk social justice, really trends towards, underprivileged minorities, which is always fun. And then, also takes advantage of public money. So these new sports leagues, if they're competitive gaming, really do bring a lot of interest in terms of saying, hey, this might get really popular, this might get really big, and it's not going to get really big at the expense of cities and underprivileged people.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Okay, let's see if I can sum up what you said. Was it kind of that these guys, they're a little bit more grassroots. So here's an example that I was just thinking of when you were going through this. So Dota 2, the International 5, that's the event that just happened we're talking about here. And there's a documentary about it called Free to Play. It's a really
awesome.
It's an acclaimed documentary. I've seen it. It's really good, and it's a great documentary. And everyone says, man, this is the best esports documentary ever. And, I kind of don't feel that way just for me personally. So the stories about these guys...
There's a better esports documentary?
Than free to play, in my opinion, yeah. So
really? Okay, what do we got?
In free to play, all the guys that are the main featured characters, basically, it's kind of a typical gamer nerd kind of narrative. The parents didn't believe them at first. They were spending too much time indoors, not doing their homework, whatever. And eventually, when they start getting good and winning prize money, then the parents are like, okay, I guess, maybe we can accept it. So there's that kind of, especially to be fair, the Asian families, it's a little bit tougher for the kids there. So, however, the one I like more that resonated with me, and we talked about this a long time ago, Seth Byrne and the old school Magic the Gathering scene. We were just, there was some money to be made, but not really. We were sinking it in. And there's just a bunch of kind of reject, nerd characters in this old gaming scene. And actually, the documentary The Smash Brothers about Smash Melee really reminded me more of that. Just really compelling figures. You had like the one guy who's the partier. There's like the robotic guy who, everyone thought was really, maybe on the autism scale. So there's all these just different personalities, kind of the more clean-cut guy. And so the Smash Brothers is a great documentary to me. Just guys sitting in these, tournament halls in crappy hotels, out in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. So, yeah, just like people, trying to be the best they can in the world for not much reason, really, and no one really understands why, except for them.
Well, and by the way, I don't know if you saw, you said Smash Bros. I had to get my Ganondorf amiibo
Oh,
out.
there you go.
This is me being impatient. All the people that talk online about amiibos and scalpers and whatever, I've been supporting the scalpers. I apologize because I wasn't going to wait till September to get my Ganondorf amiibo. I ordered this from overseas early for I think twice the cost. Apologies. The trying to be the best, by the way, I feel that every sport has had that. I feel that the people that are starting to quit football are showing that, which is there are people that do this that have legitimately no reason to. I mean, let's look at Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant already has a Hall of Fame career. Kobe Bryant has already made hundreds of millions of dollars when you factor in sponsorships. Why is Kobe Bryant in his mid-30s going overseas to Germany and getting injections and God knows what done to his body, and then coming back and training super hard and then spending hours playing basketball? Every hour you see someone play basketball in a game, be aware that there's, several more behind it, right? If they're playing a game, they practice that week. And even if they didn't practice, they had to do conditioning. And even if they didn't do conditioning, there's nutrition. And even if there's not nutrition, there's blah. There's all of this work that goes into this 1 hour. And you go, what are you doing this for? Because for some players, right, for LeBron James, who's getting, probably $50 million a year after endorsements, fine. But there are some players in the NBA that, when we look at how much players are paid, I'm very annoyed because people don't understand how numbers work, even things like Kickstarter. So I've talked about this on, you'll watch a successful Kickstarter campaign get $100,000. And you go, this person got $100,000. Well, no, they didn't. What happened is Kickstarter took a fee, which is probably like 10%. So you're down to 90,000. A bunch of the people that agreed to do it ended up backing out at the last second, so you're down to $80,000. Well, part of the way they got that money is they agreed to rewards and prizes, so they're spending $30,000, so they're down to $50,000. They have to pay taxes. So boom, congratulations, they got $25,000. It's not the same as like a six-figure job. I've even learned this being self-employed versus working for a company. The way you're taxed if you're self-employed is way different than if you're working for a company and you've got your own healthcare and all this. So when you watch people try and understand numbers of professional athletes, I find that most people are very incorrect in their assumptions. Basically, a professional athlete's looking to make enough money in 6 years to really sustain them for the rest of their lives if they don't have a backup plan. Like Kenny Smith, for instance, got his degree. A lot of these athletes that get degrees, it's kind of funny when you watch them have long NBA careers, but the athletes that get degrees have a backup plan. The athletes that don't get a degree, the one and doneers, basically they're saying this money is got to be enough to complete my education, to sustain me while I'm doing that and sustain me for a long time. So when it comes down to that, we have a lot of people that are playing professional sports for nothing or next to nothing. Minor leagues, my wife still doesn't believe me when I bring this up, and this was a Freakonomics point. The average Major League Baseball player makes less money than a teacher. And that's because of things like
A
AAA and
professional player, right? Not the
professional.
majors. Yeah.
Now, obviously not the majors, but that's the problem is people see Major League Baseball and they see Miguel Cabrera just signed for 100 million or whatever, and they go, "Wow, these players are making so much money." They don't realize that in any of these sports leagues, it's less than a couple thousand players. Like the NBA is like 500 to 600 players active in a season. That's the entire season. That's including 10-dayers. That's including wave players. So a lot of these players are really not playing for a lot. I don't actually find that this sounds mean. Like I'm actually interested in watching it. But when people act surprised and go, why are these people doing this for nothing just to be in the best? It's very clear in sports, right? If you're a 10-year veteran that's making the veteran minimum with after agents and taxes and all this other jazz isn't going to be that much. You love the game. And there's so many people, professional wrestling is just this example of these people love doing it. And they, you look at like Terry Funk, who was in the great movie Beyond the Mat, is like wrestling in gym halls. This is this person who, yeah, sure, was able to make hundreds of thousands of dollars wrestling in sold out arenas, but is now wrestling in gym halls just because he loves it. And I don't find that that's surprising. But all I can say about professional gaming and the excitement there is, yeah, clearly there were people that were doing this for fun. We've talked like speed runs before. These are people that have put hours and hours and hours into taking apart one game. Like, what is the use of being able to speed run Zelda Ocarina of Time? Which, by the way, those speed runs are my hats off to you people that have done them. Those are some of the most amazing, impressive things I've ever seen. Don't pay you any money. There's not a lot surprising there, but the excitement about competitive gaming is there actually potentially being money there.
No, and that's the original, the answer to the original question, right? When did ESPN change from John Skipper's statement in the Game Theorist video to where they are now, giving big coverage of it? So this is just like a 2-minute segment they did recapping the event, but they actually did a full like 2+ hour long broadcast of Heroes of the Storm, the Blizzard game that's similar to Dota. They did UC Berkeley versus Arizona State and just showed it on air. So they've come full circle. And yeah, that's the answer, right? When did it become a sport? Well, when the money got big enough and enough people started watching it and playing it, and that's it.
Well, compare poker and online gaming to football, right? For football, you need a stadium. And oftentimes, unfortunately, the public foolishly gives hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to teams to build a stadium. And then you need millions of dollars to pay these players. And then you need, all of the people like ESPN, they're high paid, right, announcers. Well, look at competitive gaming and look at poker. Poker, all it took, this was the amazing breakthrough for poker, was the whole camera. This little camera you could put on the table that had to have been very inexpensive, right? A poker table is already an expensive investment. A casino that has a poker table has already invested probably thousands of dollars on that, right? So putting a little inexpensive camera underneath every single one, my phone's got the cheapest phone has a camera in it, so it couldn't have been that expensive to add those. Well, now it's really easy to show professional poker for not a lot of overhead. Now, these games, right? Now, sure, I noticed that was really awesome. They had pyrotechnics. They had them in a big arena.
It was Key Arena in Seattle.
Key Arena. That's freak. I wish I could have gone. They had it in Key Arena. We've been there though, right? Not Key. Have we been to Key Arena? I'm trying to remember. Anyway, so
it's near the Space Needle, actually.
Okay. So Key Arena, lots of people there, all this jazz. And, sure, there's some overhead there, but, the computers, right? That's the funny thing. If you look at the cost of a high-end computer to game on, it's not even going to be close to the cost of like a professional athlete, even some of the equipment that like hockey players and football players. So the overhead isn't that high. The boundary to entry isn't as hard. And then just, because that's the problem. A lot of the professional sports leagues in the United States, I wouldn't have a problem if you built them from the ground up. If you built them the way they should be built, which is to say, if you're eligible to play an adult, you can play. If you're allowed to negotiate your own contract, there's enough, there's not really a collusion on the end. These are essentially monopolies, so that they could negotiate in good faith. But that's not the case, and that will not be the case for a long time, right? There is too much money bundled in the NFL and the NHL and the NBA. I don't believe I said NHL second, but the NBA, Major League Baseball, for them to go away for a long time. One of my favorite books is called Willful Blindness, and it's about this coal mining town where this coal mining town was getting destroyed by the mine, and it took years and years and years for the people to even be willing to take a a court case against the company because the company was such a big part of the economy. So that's kind of the exciting thing about online gaming to me, or competitive gaming, sorry, is that it doesn't have this kind of really broke system, and I don't have to feel guilty liking it, right? Like the worst I'm going to feel, I might say, I've never felt bad saying, how do they get so much money, right? That's what some people are going to say. I can't believe those kids made 6.6 million doing this. And I did notice some of that stigma. They're like, oh, they're just sitting on the couch doing nothing anyway. I've never felt bad when the market kind of just gives money randomly because that's always been the case, right? Through the history of economics, there's always just been random people that make a lot of money for kind of arbitrary reasons. Um, in terms of watching something competitive that gets big, I have no guilt associated with this. So the idea that it can grow and become big is very exciting to me.
No, it is. It's cool. It's fun. It's a new thing, and it's growing up a lot faster than our current popular sports were in their infancy. So we'll see. But it's funny that I agree with everything you just said. But the funny thing is, the leagues and the teams don't don't agree. Like they want to be like real sports. That's what they always say. Real sports. Traditional sports. They want to be in these big arenas. They want to
I'm fine with
have
that.
sponsorships and all that. They want to start doing drug testing. They're worried about Adderall, and I'm serious. ESL is one of the biggest leagues, Electronic Sports League. They're from Europe and they're in the U.S. now, and they're going to ban Adderall and things like that. So and do drug testing. So they're trying to move towards being professional sports.
I don't mind a lot of the stuff about professional sports leagues. We just talked professional soccer versus the NFL, right? In Europe, it is perfectly acceptable to just let players negotiate and sell their rights and whatever. That's fine. That we don't have an issue with that there. Bad teams get relegated. We just have a really kooky system for sports in the United States. And what I'm saying is, if you're going to build from the ground up, yeah, take the good parts, right? Take the big arenas, take the exciting sponsorships, all that jazz. Just leave out things like,
The
hey,
draft
you have to go to college for 2 years. And yeah, you have to go
That's
to a
fair.
crappy team that you don't want to. So that's the excitement is, of course, I guarantee you, as this grows, we're going to notice issues we have with it. We'll say, I can't believe they're doing this and this and this and this. We'll notice systemic biases. I mean, it's gaming, so I'm 100% willing to bet that as this grows, we'll find out more and more about sexism. That's just how it's going to go.
Yeah.
And we'll comment on it, and we'll get listeners saying stick to sports. That's fine. But the key point is, I am excited about a newer league that kind of leaves a lot of the old mentalities, because we talk about the old boys club in professional sports a lot. I like leaving some of those at the door and kind of coming, more full circle.
I agree. I'll kind of give a really funny example though. Is so the team that won, it was an American team. That's another reason why it was a big deal. We were expecting, well, we weren't expecting, but Europe and China and Asia usually does better in Dota. But an American team won, great. And one of the kids on that team, he's 16 years old. He's from Pakistan. So that was kind of interesting, right? He was like the young gun, and then the team captain was like the veteran guy, North American guy. He was 27.
He like 19 or something?
No, he's 27, so he's an old man.
27?
Oh, yeah.
Wow,
He's an old man. But the funny thing is, the 16-year-old kid, Sumail, he was a 10-year veteran. He started playing at the age of 6, and it's because Dota's an old school game. It's been around for over 10 years now. So, yeah, it's funny how that goes.
I don't have much. I mean, I might have to get a Sumail jersey at some point
Yeah.
or something. But yeah, I don't know how to interpret any of that. Like all this different. You're like 10-year vet that's 6 years old, agent veteran who's 27.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see the American. Obviously, an American team winning is just good for interest. And it's one of those. I'd love to see more sponsors and people get behind this. So let's make it happen.
The and sponsors are how this stuff is run for the most part. It's not like the traditional leagues where there's franchises and everything. Basically, the teams are the way they run are kind of like agencies almost. They fly the players around, make sure to get them in front of the camera, wearing their sponsor logos and all that, and produce content and everything. So yeah, it's similar to I'd say the X Games in that regard. Same demographic, late teen, early 20 males. And sponsored by Red Bull, Monster Energy, companies like that. So that's kind of where esports is headed, it looks like.
I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been World of Warcraft or Warcraft 3. When I was in New Zealand a few years ago, that we actually there was like an Asian channel and we saw a championship game of that going on. And the one thing I'll say, because I watched the like clip you sent me of the U.S. team winning, is get good announcers. Just get people who know what they're talking about. It's great to be on ESPN, but get people who know what they're talking about. Because I get that not everybody's a subject matter expert on Dota and may not understand what's going on, but people who good color commentators can make or break something. Like
Yeah.
Jim Ross in WWE, these people, it's silly outfits and silly moves. I think you were telling me about a wrestling you watched where they were like selling like Cool Ranch nachos being hot or something, which is
Yes.
amazing. That's what you're supposed to do. But get a good announcer. That's all I can say. But beyond all that, yeah, it's kind of a boring topic to just be like, this is really exciting and really cool. But and the implications that we have watching it. So we've hit about an hour, Brian. We actually went really long on that topic because it is fascinating. So I'm going to head us to shout outs unless you have anything else to end on. I'll let you get the last word on competitive video games. We'll go to shout outs.
No, I think I pretty much got everything in there. Just I really wanted to hit the economic side and the media side. And I will say that, yeah, the big esports do have big beloved personalities for announcers. And in fact, the announcers do really well financially. Usually they get paid even more than the players because they're kind of like the face of the game. So they do pretty well.
Good. And all I'm saying is, yeah, if we're making this catch on the U.S., just get those good announcers because
There we go.
not necessarily knowing having someone who's like, if I'm commenting on cricket and I kind of know what's going on cricket, it's not going to be exciting to cricket fans and to non-cricket fans. They'll be like, why is this guy talking? I'll just be like, and that guy blocked the ball and I think it's he's running as bad as good. I don't know, is the stick going? What's going on? Oh, apparently he won. Good job. Amazing performance. Yeah. So with that said, shout outs. I think I already gave one of mine away, but the Death of Superman Lives, amazing documentary. You can buy it. I'm really starting to like VHX because I really like special features on my media. And it's really easy to buy just on-demand videos now, but it's really hard to get I really like directors' commentaries. And so I hate having to buy a DVD or a Blu-ray to get the director's commentary. So VHX is a service where indie people can make their movie and release, it's got director's commentaries, it's got behind the scenes. I love that. I bought Stripped, which is a documentary about webcomics, and then The Death of Superman Lives, which is, another documentary, and they both have great special features. So that's my first shout out. My second shout out is a more somber one, nothing to do with sports. I am shouting out the amazing Indian restaurant Sairam, which is, according to TripAdvisor, the #2 rated restaurant in Appleton, which is a crime. It should be the #1 rated restaurant. They've been in business for almost 20 years. They're consistently rated high. They are the best Indian food restaurant in Appleton, and they are closing on the 15th of August. Basically, the owners are retiring and their kids are going away to college. So, got to give a shout out. My wife and I have only been here about a year. That was kind of becoming a weekly staple for us. We're going to have to find a new restaurant. But an amazing restaurant. If you got time in the next couple of days, if you're near the Appleton area and want good Indian food, I hear they're going to have lots of waits, but check them out. And we wish them the best in their future, and are sad to see them close.
That is sad.
I know, right? Anybody for you? I think you said a couple. I mean, I cheated. I made one of your shout outs the entire second half of the show.
There you go. No, that was good. We talked about it well. I actually will steal one of your shout outs from earlier in the show. Eugene Fisher, Glorious Hubris himself, for watching in Twitch chat and commenting during the show tonight.
Did he say anything?
He did. Yeah, he did.
All right.
So thanks for watching.
Perfect. All right. Well, that is our show. If you found us not through our website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. You can also find the show as the Boxscore Geeks Show in iTunes and Stitcher. Vote us up, subscribe. It definitely helps us out. We have a live show every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. If you missed the live show, go ahead and check us out at YouTube. We put the shows up after they're done there on channel Nerd Numbers. And with that, we'll see you next week.